Nobody from my family showed up to my graduation, not my wife, not my kids, not even a single seat with my name on it. They were all at my brother's barbecue party laughing around a pool while I walked across a stage I fought 5 years to reach. And the moment I stepped off my phone buzzed with a message that froze my blood. We need to talk, urgently. Then I saw it 45 missed calls from my wife. 45. If you've ever felt the moment your greatest victory twisted into your worst fear, you'll understand exactly where I was standing. My name is Kai Mercer, and this is the hardest story I've ever told. Before I share it with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just drop a hi, or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story reaches. Sometimes knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story resonates with you even a little, consider subscribing. It helps more than you think, and it reminds me I'm not sharing these moments alone. I walked off that stage with my diploma in my hand, and a hollow pit in my chest because every seat reserved for my family, my wife, my kids, my parents sat empty under the bright auditorium lights. People around me were crying, hugging passing flowers down long rows of proud relatives. I just stood there alone, trying to swallow the sting while pretending it didn't matter. 5 years of late-night classes, early morning shifts, and weekends sacrificed had brought me to this moment. And somehow, I was the only one who showed up for it. I'm Kai Mercer, 30 years old, living in Denver, Colorado. For half a decade, I'd been splitting myself into pieces, 10 hours a day at Evergreen Capital, 3 hours of night classes at the University of Colorado, Denver, and whatever scraps of time remained for my wife, Sienna, and our 2 kids. Jackson, 8, loud, competitive, always trying to one-up his cousins. Luna, 6, soft-spoken and glued to my side whenever I managed to make it home before her bedtime. I loved them more than anything, but over the years a strange distance had built between us, like they were drifting on a current I kept trying and failing to swim against. My parents, Mark and Evelyn, lived down in Santa Fe. They were the kind of parents who cheered loudest for my older brother, Rowan, and somehow never noticed when I needed them. Rowan had been the golden child since birth. He scored touchdowns. They traveled across states to watch. I won academic awards. They mailed me a congratulatory card. As adults, nothing changed. Rowan bought a new house. They spent 2 weeks helping him renovate. I asked if they could babysit during my final exams. They said they were exhausted from driving and promised to help next time. There never was a next time. Maybe that was why I chased the MBA so hard, to finally prove to myself that I wasn't just Rowan's quiet shadow. Becoming senior portfolio manager meant stability, a future, a chance for my family to breathe easier. I thought finishing this degree would finally mean being seen, not only by my firm, but by the people I loved most. But when I stepped down from the stage, the first thing my phone lit up with wasn't a congratulations or a photo of my kids holding a sign saying, "Go, Dad." It was a message from Sienna. We need to talk. Urgently. And beneath that 45 missed calls, I stood under the shadow of the university building, the noise of celebration fading behind me, realizing this day wasn't an ending or a beginning, it was a warning. Something was already unraveling, and whatever it was had been happening long before I crossed that stage. I stared at my phone as the campus lights buzzed above me, and for the first time all day, I felt the truth settling in. The empty seats weren't an accident. They were the first crack in a much deeper fault line I was only now beginning to see. The moment I saw those empty seats, my mind snapped back through 5 grinding years of a double life. Every morning I dragged myself out of bed at 5 packed lunches, handled quick emails, drove to Evergreen Capital for a 10-hour shift, then raced across Denver to make it to class by 6. I'd sit under fluorescent lights until 9 at night, take notes until my hand cramped, then go home to a sink full of dishes and 2 kids already asleep. Jackson would complain in the mornings that I never came to his games. Luna would fall asleep with a book on her chest because I wasn't home to read it to her. I told myself it was temporary, that one day they'd understand why I missed so much. Sienna understood at first. She was proud, really proud. But as semesters piled up and I spent more nights hunched over textbooks than beside her, she changed. She started working more weekend shifts. She stopped waiting up for me. Conversations became shorter, colder, and eventually stopped being conversations at all. She never yelled. She didn't have to. Silence can build a wall thicker than any argument. My parents didn't help. Anytime I asked for support, they were busy helping Rowan. If he sneezed, they brought soup and blankets. If I called, they said they'd get back to me and never did. When I asked them to watch the kids so I could attend a mandatory study session before finals, they said they had to drive down to help Rowan assemble an outdoor grill. A grill. While I begged for help balancing the weight of my life. Then 2 weeks before graduation, the first crack ripped wide open. Rowan sent a group message announcing he was hosting a massive barbecue in Colorado Springs on the exact same day as my graduation. He didn't ask. He didn't check. He just declared it like everyone should naturally show up. My parents responded instantly. "We'll be there. Rowan, can't wait." My kids saw the message and immediately started talking about swimming pools and water slides. Sienna didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes told me she was already picturing herself there too. I called Rowan, trying to keep my voice steady. He brushed me off like my graduation was some errand I'd invented. "It's just a ceremony, Kai. You're 30. You already had one after college. This barbecue is for the whole family. Don't make it weird." Hearing that hit harder than I expected. Not because he dismissed the degree, but because I could tell deep down he truly believed I should rearrange my life around his. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat at the dining table staring at the graduation tickets I'd ordered months ago. 6 tickets each with a printed name. I'd imagined handing them out proudly. Imagined Sienna smiling. Imagined my parents telling me they were proud. Now they stared back at me like evidence in a case I didn't want to solve. I went to bed with a knot in my stomach, a quiet, heavy certainty forming in my chest. My family wasn't choosing between my graduation and the barbecue. They had already chosen, and it wasn't me. That was the night the first real fracture appeared, anger, disappointment, and something colder underneath the sense that I was losing my family before I even realized they were slipping away. 2 weeks before graduation, I threw myself into preparations the way someone does when they're trying to hold their life together through sheer will. I reserved a table at Highlands Prime, the nicest place I could afford. I bought a new navy suit, scheduled a haircut, printed the tickets, and even emailed reminders to everyone: Sienna, my parents, Rowan, my sister-in-law, choosing optimism over history. They had promised they would be there. I believed them because I needed to believe them. But as the date crept closer, something about Sienna started to shift. Every time I mentioned the ceremony, she deflected. She'd check her work schedule, scroll through her phone, or change the subject entirely. When I asked whether she'd picked out clothes for the kids, she mumbled something about still thinking. It wasn't anger, just distance. A space between us she no longer tried to hide. I asked myself if I was imagining it, but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. Then my mom called one afternoon, her voice too casual, the way people sound when they assume you already know something. "Sienna mentioned the kids will ride with us to Colorado Springs, right? We're leaving early so Rowan can get help setting up." I froze. The phone slipped in my hand. I hadn't heard a word about this. My own mother knew my children's plans before I did. And in that second, something clicked into place. Sienna and Rowan had already discussed the BBQ, had already made arrangements, had already chosen. I wasn't part of the conversation. I wasn't even part of the equation. That night when Jackson and Luna were in their rooms, I asked Sienna directly. No preface, no softening. She hesitated before admitting the truth: the kids wanted to go to the barbecue. They'd been talking about the pool and the water slide for weeks. And she thought it would be too much to make them sit through a 3-hour ceremony. "It'll overwhelm them," she said, like she was doing them a favor. A different version of me might have stayed calm. But the words punched something open in me I'd been holding shut for too long. I told her this wasn't about a ceremony. It was about me finally reaching something I had fought for every single day. She said I was being selfish, that I cared more about being applauded than about our children's happiness. Somehow I ended up defending myself in my own house, explaining why my one moment of pride should matter too. Jackson overheard and came downstairs. "Dad, the BBQ will be way more fun." "Why can't we go?" Luna cried, because she thought I was trying to keep her from seeing her cousins. They weren't being cruel, they were being children, but the pain was no less sharp. I realized then that somewhere along the way I had lost any influence over my own family. Whatever I had tried to build over 5 years of sacrifice had slipped through my fingers. That night, I lay awake staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The same house I worked to pay for. The same house I barely slept in because of late-night classes. I wondered if maybe I had given so much to my future that I had accidentally emptied my present. Or maybe they simply hadn't noticed how much I was trying. Either way, I went to sleep knowing something fundamental had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. The morning of my graduation felt nothing like the day I'd imagined. Instead of excitement, the house carried a cold, hurried tension. I woke early, dressed in my suit, and tried to steady myself. But in the kitchen, Sienna was packing sunscreen and towels, tossing snacks into a cooler while barely glancing in my direction. Jackson zipped up a bag stuffed with swim trunks. Luna was already in her glittery flip-flops. No one asked what time my ceremony started. No one asked if I was nervous or excited. It was like my big day didn't exist at all. Then my phone buzzed a message from Rowan. "We're close. Be ready." It wasn't for me, it was for them. A moment later, Sienna said she'd try to meet me at the ceremony afterward if things went smoothly. I heard something inside myself go quiet. A silence I couldn't fill, a space I couldn't cross. I kissed the kids' heads, but they were already reaching for the door. "Sienna," I said, blocking her path for a second. "Are you still coming? Are you keeping your promise?" She sighed as if I was asking too much. She said I should understand that children need joy, not long speeches. She said a father should know that. And in that brief exchange, I realized I would be walking into that auditorium alone. When they left, I noticed a piece of paper on the counter, Sienna's handwriting. Took the kids early to help Rowan set up. "Good luck. We'll try to be there. No apology, no congratulations, not even my name. Just a note you'd leave for a delivery driver." I drove to campus alone, watching families pile into SUVs with balloons and flowers, while I stared at the empty passenger seat beside me. The city felt surreal, like I had stepped outside my own life and was watching someone else's unfold. The closer I got to the university, the more I questioned whether I had misjudged everything: my marriage, my relationships, my role as a father. Or maybe I had simply been pretending things were better than they were. In the parking lot, I checked my phone out of habit and saw a photo Sienna had posted minutes earlier. She, my parents, and Rowan stood in front of his grill, smiling under a string of backyard lights. Jackson and Luna were already in the pool behind them. The timestamp lined up perfectly with the moment they pulled out of our driveway. They hadn't just chosen the BBQ. They had never intended to come at all. My hands shook around my phone. Not with rage, not even with sadness. With something deeper, heavier, the realization that maybe I had been alone long before today. I walked into the auditorium and watched families pack into every row, parents waving at their kids on stage, partners recording everything, children cheering. My section had 6 empty chairs, 6 reminders that I had failed to make myself matter to the people who should have cared most. I took my seat with a numbness I couldn't shake, knowing that after this ceremony ended, the real confrontation, whatever form it would take, was waiting for me. The noise inside the auditorium felt like a living thing. Shouts, laughter, families calling out to graduates as if they were sending them into a new life with a burst of joy. Everywhere I turned, someone was posing for a picture or being wrapped in a proud embrace. Bouquets rustled, cameras clicked, people cried in each other's arms. And there I was, standing in the middle of it all with my hands in my pockets, surrounded by empty space where my family should have been. Every cheer around me made the silence beside me louder. I told myself to hold it together, to just get through the ceremony and deal with the rest later. But when I heard someone call my name, it startled me hard enough that I flinched. I looked up and saw Cassidy Hale, my closest coworker, the one person who had seen me dragging myself through work these past 5 years, jogging toward me with a smile. She wasn't dressed for a graduation. She'd clearly left work early. "Kai," she said breathlessly, "I wasn't about to let you stand here alone today." That one sentence hit me harder than anything my own family had done. They hadn't shown up. She had. When they began calling names, my chest tightened. I listened to applause after applause, each one punctuated by loving cheers from the audience. When my section rose, it felt like I was stepping into a spotlight I didn't deserve because the people I wanted to share it with weren't there to see it. Kai Mercer, the announcer said. I walked across the stage under the bright lights, the applause sounding hollow in my ears. I looked toward the row reserved for my family, 6 seats perfectly aligned. Still empty. Nothing but blank space where their faces should have been. As I took my seat again, I felt my phone buzz inside my jacket. I ignored it at first, trying to focus, but it wouldn't stop. After a few vibrations, I finally pulled it out and saw a single message from Sienna waiting on my lock screen. We need to talk. Urgently. My stomach tightened. Something inside me whispered that this wasn't just an apology for missing the ceremony. Something was wrong. Then the dean stepped up to announce the academic honors. My name came up as one of the top MBA graduates of the year. The hall erupted in applause. People clapped, families stood, classmates congratulated one another. I sat completely still. I kept imagining my kids hearing my name. I kept imagining Sienna smiling for the camera. I kept imagining my parents looking proud for once, but none of them were there to witness any of it. When the final applause faded, I took my phone off silent. The screen exploded with notifications. 45 missed calls from Sienna. 45. My throat closed up. She wasn't someone who panicked easily. She didn't call repeatedly unless something was seriously wrong. I didn't even say goodbye to Cassidy. I just stood and rushed down the aisle, nearly stumbling in my haste. In the quiet hallway, the contrast was jarring, the noise of celebration fading behind me, the sterile echo of my footsteps stretching ahead. It felt like I was walking between 2 versions of my life, the one I had fought for and the one I was losing. My hands shook when I called Sienna back. She answered on the first ring, her voice breaking before she even said my name. Kai, oh my God, Jackson had an accident. We're at Memorial Hospital. We didn't know how to reach you. Please just come. The hall spun for a moment. My son was hurt. And suddenly nothing else mattered. I ran for the parking lot with only one thought in my head: get to him. The drive from Denver to Colorado Springs felt endless, even though I was speeding down the interstate faster than I should have. Every mile stretched tight between fear and anger. Fear because my son was hurt. Anger because he shouldn't have been at that barbecue in the first place. Every time I gripped the wheel tighter, I imagined how that day could have been different if they'd come to my ceremony. If Rowan hadn't planned his party. If Sienna had told me the truth, instead of making decisions behind my back. Halfway there, my phone buzzed with a long text from Sienna. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. She admitted she had let the kids choose the BBQ weeks ago. She admitted she'd promised Rowan they'd come. She admitted she hid it from me because she didn't want another fight. I felt something inside me crumble, not just trust, but the last piece of belief that she saw what mattered to me. When I walked through the sliding doors of the emergency room, I saw them immediately. My parents, Rowan, Sienna, Luna, all huddled around Jackson's bed like a picture-perfect family portrait taken at the wrong moment. Their faces were twisted with worry and fear. They touched his arm, wiped his tears, whispered comfort. They were all there for him, just not for me. I stepped closer, and even before I spoke, Eloise, my younger cousin, looked up at me with an awkward half-smile that said she already knew. She'd never been good at keeping things to herself. Rowan told everyone earlier, she said nervously, that Sienna already agreed to bring the kids. He said your graduation was just, not a big deal. She trailed off when she saw my face. Something cold spread across my chest. Of course, Rowan had framed it that way. Of course, everyone assumed I'd be fine with it. When Jackson finally noticed me, his swollen eyes widened. "Dad," he cried, "why didn't you come to the BBQ? Everyone was there." His voice broke, and that nearly shattered me. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He genuinely couldn't understand why his dad hadn't shown up to something he thought was important. He didn't understand that he had missed the biggest moment of my life. The room fell into a strained silence as I stepped beside him. I asked what happened, though my voice shook. Rowan explained quickly, saying Jackson had been showing off on the water slide and slipped. He talked like it was some unfortunate accident no one could have prevented. My parents chimed in, talking over each other like they were rushing to justify themselves. Something in me snapped. I told them I had stood alone at my own graduation. I told them that not one of them, not my wife, not my kids, not my parents, had shown up. I told them I walked across that stage and saw nothing but empty chairs. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the room. Everyone went quiet. Then my father said the one thing that pushed me past my limit. "You should have reminded us," he said. "You know how busy we are. We can't keep track of every little event. Every little event. The ceremony I worked 5 years for. The event I emailed them about. The event I reminded them of in person. The event I built my entire life around." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just stepped back, suddenly exhausted to the bone. I told Sienna I needed air, and before anyone could say anything else, I walked out of the hospital. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was walking away from an argument or walking away from a version of my family I couldn't carry anymore. Outside, the night air hit me hard, and I finally understood that the real confrontation wasn't happening in that hospital room. It was coming next, and nothing about my life would be the same afterward. I drove back to Denver that night with the road stretching endlessly in front of me, the dashboard lights blurring each time my eyes stung. The interstate was nearly empty, but my head felt crowded with everything I'd tried to ignore for years. I kept seeing Jackson crying in that hospital bed, kept seeing those empty seats in the auditorium, kept hearing my father's voice telling me my graduation was just another event. By the time I crossed into the city limits, I felt hollow, as if the day had managed to steal both my moment and the last remaining piece of respect I thought my family still held for me. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Sienna called again and again, her name lighting up the screen like a plea I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't block her, but I didn't answer either. I needed silence, not explanations said too quickly, not apologies thrown out because she felt guilty. I needed space to feel everything without someone else telling me how to feel. Then came a long audio message. I didn't plan to open it, but my thumb moved on its own. Sienna's voice filled the car, tired, choked raw. She said she'd felt like a single mother for years, like she'd been carrying the load alone while I chased something bigger. She said she was worn out from always making room for me to climb, that she had stopped feeling seen or heard long before the ceremony. But she also admitted something else she'd pushed for the BBQ because she wanted to be somewhere she didn't feel overshadowed by my achievement. The words hit harder than I expected. Part of me understood her exhaustion. Another part of me saw the truth clearly. She hadn't missed the ceremony because of the kids. She'd missed it because of resentment she never voiced. When I finally stepped into the house, the silence felt unrecognizable. Toys were scattered on the rug, the remote on the couch, a half-opened puzzle on the dining table, but no laughter, no footsteps, no voices calling my name. They were all still in Colorado Springs, and for the first time, the house felt like someone else's home, not mine. I realized then that my family had been drifting away from me long before this day. I had just been too focused on pushing forward to notice. On the kitchen table, I saw something that made my throat tighten. A small piece of paper folded unevenly. Luna's handwriting. I recognized the backward letters instantly. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't see you. I thought you didn't need me." It wasn't the spelling mistakes or the shaky lines. It was the message. My daughter believed I didn't need her. That told me everything I needed to know about what she'd been learning from the world around her. I grabbed a duffel bag, threw in clothes, and headed out again. I wasn't running. I just knew I couldn't think clearly inside a home full of wounds that were still bleeding. So I checked into the hotel I'd originally booked for my parents, the one they hadn't bothered to use. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just when I was locking the door behind me, my phone rang again, this time from my boss. His voice was bright, warm, full of pride. He congratulated me on my MBA. He told me I'd officially earned the promotion to senior portfolio manager, and that the board had been impressed with my capstone project. His words should have lifted me. Instead, they tangled with everything else inside me until I couldn't tell what I felt anymore. Proud, furious, relieved, devastated. I stood there for a long moment after the call ended, looking out the window at the quiet Denver skyline. I had fought so hard for this life, and now everything in it felt unsteady. One thing was certain: when I returned home, nothing about my family would function the way it used to. Something had to change. And this time, I wouldn't be the only one making sacrifices. I stayed at Sapphire Lodge for a full week, not hiding, not sulking, but thinking. Really thinking. I worked during the day and wrote pages of notes at night about what I wanted as a husband, a father, a man. Every evening I FaceTimed Jackson and Luna. I checked on his cast, asked about school, listened to Luna talk about her drawings. I kept the connection alive, but I didn't go back. Not yet. Distance was the boundary I should have drawn years ago. On the third day, Sienna showed up at the hotel. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She said the house felt unbearable without me. She said the kids missed me. She said she missed me. But even then, her words circled around how she felt, not once around what I had been carrying. So I told her I wasn't ready. That we'd talk, but not on her timeline. For once, she didn't fight me on it. Maybe she sensed something had finally shifted. Unexpectedly, my parents arrived the next afternoon carrying homemade food and that same old line. It's all just a misunderstanding. But I didn't let it slide this time. I sat them down and walked through nearly every moment of my life when I had been pushed aside for Rowan childhood games, achievements, ignored promises, broken, help denied. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just laid it out plainly, piece by piece. And for the first time, their faces showed recognition instead of defensiveness. My father's eyes watered. He said he never realized how much it had impacted me. My mother apologized through tears, saying she should have been at my graduation, that of all the days to show up, that was the one. Their apology didn't erase years of imbalance, but it cracked something open. It was a start. On the fifth day, Rowan came. He didn't swagger in with confidence like usual. He looked tired, weighed down. He admitted something I had never expected to hear. He kept the BBQ on my graduation day because he wanted everyone to himself. He said pressure from our parents made him cling to being the successful son. He'd feared losing that spotlight. His honesty didn't absolve him, but it explained him. Later that night, Sienna returned. She wasn't asking for forgiveness this time. She said she'd scheduled marriage counseling. She said she wanted to rebuild things the right way, not just patch them up. For the first time in a long time, her words felt intentional. I sat her down and told her what I needed going forward: clarity, respect for my achievements, shared decision-making with the kids, boundaries with extended family, and recognition that our household came first. She agreed to everything, not reluctantly, not defensively, but genuinely. A day later, I visited Jackson. He sat on the couch with his cast covered in signatures, looking smaller than usual. He leaned into me and whispered, "Dad, I want to be like you when I grow up, but I don't want to feel alone like you did that day." Those words broke something inside me, but they also rebuilt something. If my own son could understand the pain I carried, then maybe I could teach my family to understand it too. I returned home at the end of the week. It wasn't triumph or surrender. It was intentional. Sienna and I began therapy. The kids learned why that day mattered. My parents promised to show up more, to share attention instead of dividing it. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt something more honest than what we had before. About a month later, Rowan surprised me with a small celebration, just close friends, co-workers, and family. A cake with my school colors. A short speech from him about my perseverance. My parents brought a framed photo of me in my graduation gown, the one they had commissioned from the university photographer, and asked if they could hang it in their living room. When I finally placed my MBA diploma on the wall of my new office at Evergreen Capital, I realized something important. My value had never depended on their recognition, but choosing to stand up for myself helped the right people step forward to stand with me. In the end, the story wasn't about being abandoned. It was about finally being seen, finally being heard, and choosing to rebuild a life where I no longer disappeared behind anyone, not even the people I loved most. In the weeks that followed, life didn't magically fix itself, but something inside me finally settled. Not because everyone suddenly understood me, And not because the past was erased, but because I stopped abandoning myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't sprinting to keep up with expectations or apologizing for wanting to be seen. I was simply standing where I was and asking the people who loved me to stand with me. And they did, slowly, imperfectly, but they did. Jackson still asks questions about the graduation, sometimes mostly wanting to understand why grown-ups make choices that hurt each other. Luna hugs me tighter than she used to, as if she's making up for the seat she didn't occupy that day. And Sienna, she doesn't rush her apologies anymore. She listens. She reflects. She shows up. Therapy hasn't been easy. Sitting in that room, hearing how both of us contributed to the distance between us, has forced me to confront parts of myself I didn't like. My tendency to shut down. My belief that hard work alone guaranteed love. The way I pushed through exhaustion until no one could reach me, not even the people closest to me. I always thought responsibility was measured in how much I carried. Now I understand it's also measured in how openly I share the weight. My parents are learning too. Sometimes my mom brings up old memories, moments she overlooked without realizing how deeply they shaped me. My dad still struggles to put emotions into words, but he tries. And the trying matters more than perfection ever could. Rowan, well, things are different with him. Not close, not distant. Just honest. For the first time in our lives, he doesn't assume I'll bend around him, and I no longer shrink around him. We've become two adults standing on equal ground rather than one towering over the other while pretending we're the same height. But the truth is, none of this would have shifted if I hadn't stepped back and taken that week alone. Distance gave me clarity I didn't know I needed. Silence made room for truths I'd been too afraid to speak. And watching my son look at me with worry in his eyes made me realize the cost of staying quiet. That day at the graduation wasn't just a moment of heartbreak. It was a turning point, the kind that hurts first and heals later. A reminder that even when people let you down, you can choose not to let yourself down. A reminder that family should be built, not assumed. A reminder that boundaries aren't walls. They're blueprints for healthier relationships. Sometimes the loudest wake-up call comes from an empty chair. Sometimes it takes a broken moment to rebuild a stronger life. And sometimes the people you need most are the ones who fail you first, but then they learn, they grow, and they show up better than before. If you've ever stood alone on a day when you shouldn't have been alone, I hope you know this, you're not the only one. And you're not weak for wanting to be valued. You're human. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be celebrated. And even if no one claps for you on the day you cross your stage, whatever that stage may be, you still crossed it. You still earned it. You still matter. I'm grateful I kept going. I'm grateful something broke that day because what came afterward finally made space for something new to grow. And if my story reached you today, if any part of it echoes something in your own life, I want to ask you for something simple. Just let me know you're here. Say listening in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you think to know someone is out there hearing this, feeling this, understanding this. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about family resilience, rebuilding, healing, please consider subscribing. Not because numbers matter, but because community does. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in an empty row wondering if they're the only one. And maybe through stories like this, they won't have to feel alone anymore. And as I look back now, I realize something I couldn't see in the middle of the chaos. Sometimes the life you're trying to protect is the same life that's quietly breaking you. Sometimes love becomes routine, routine becomes expectation, and expectation becomes a kind of blindness. We stop noticing the people who carry everything in silence. We forget to ask how they're doing. We assume they're strong enough to live without reassurance. I used to think strength meant endurance. That if I pushed hard enough, worked long enough, sacrificed quietly enough, the people around me would understand. But understanding doesn't grow from silence. It grows from truth. Messy, uncomfortable, vulnerable truth. And that's what I'm learning to give now. I'm learning to say, I need you here. I'm learning to say that hurt me. I'm learning to believe my worth isn't measured by how much I can handle alone. Healing isn't linear. Some days the memory of that empty row still stings. Some nights I wonder if things would have been different had I spoken up sooner. But then I see my son trying to be gentler. I see my daughter watching me with new respect. I see my wife reaching for me instead of pulling away. And I see myself finally choosing not to disappear inside my own life. Maybe that's the real graduation. Not the diploma, not the applause, but the moment you step out of who you used to be and walk toward who you're meant to become. And if my journey says anything, let it say this: it's never too late to reclaim your voice. It's never too late to ask for more. It's never too late to rewrite the story you're living in. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. Your presence matters. Your listening matters. And wherever you are right now, whatever weight you're carrying, I hope you know you deserve a life that values you just as fiercely as you value everyone else. My 6-year-old niece called me on a stormy night, her voice trembling through the static. I'm locked in, starving. Please help, Uncle. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys, racing into the rain toward my parents' house, the place she was supposed to be safe. But when I opened that door, what I found made my blood boil. And then, I'm Silas Kane, and this is the most painful truth I've ever had to speak out loud. I never imagined my own family could be capable of this. I'm about to share everything with you, raw and unfiltered. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And please, if my story touches you, consider subscribing to this channel. Your support means the world. It helps me keep telling stories that need to be heard, stories of truth, pain, and survival. The phone rang just before midnight, its vibration cutting through the steady hum of rain against my apartment windows. I glanced at the screen, an unfamiliar number from Salem. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but something inside me told me to answer. The voice on the other end was thin, trembling, a whisper swallowed by static and thunder. Uncle Silas, I'm locked in a room. I'm so hungry. Please help me. Then the line went dead. My chest tightened. I called back immediately, but the call didn't connect. I tried again, nothing. I dialed my parents' house where my niece Ivy had been living since my brother vanished from her life. No answer. I tried my mother's cell, then my father's. Straight to voicemail each time. The silence was louder than the storm outside. I grabbed my truck keys with shaking hands, pulling on an old raincoat and stuffing a flashlight and first aid kit into a bag. The air outside was heavy with electricity, the kind of storm that made the streets look like rivers under the lightning's glare. Tires skidded on wet asphalt as I barreled down I-5, every mile a war against the pounding rain and my own spiraling thoughts. Why would Ivy be locked in a room? Why hadn't I listened to my gut sooner when I noticed the shadows under her eyes and how she clung to that ragged stuffed bear of hers? I should have known. By the time I pulled into the quiet cul-de-sac outside my parents' house in Salem, my heartbeat was louder than the thunder. The house sat there in darkness, shutters rattling in the wind. Too quiet, too perfect on the outside. The lawn neatly trimmed, the white fence glistening with rain. A mask of order hiding rot. The front door was locked tight, no lights inside. I circled to the back, my flashlight catching on the glint of raindrops. The kitchen window was jammed but brittle with age. I pressed my shoulder against the frame until the glass gave way, shattering in a muted crash under the roar of the storm. Shards crunched beneath my boots as I pulled myself into the cold silence of the house. The air reeked faintly of mildew. I crept through the hallway, every creak of the floorboards amplified. My light caught on a narrow door at the end of the hall. The wooden frame bore scratches where a latch had been forced shut from the outside. My stomach turned. I unhooked the lock, swung the door open, and there she was. Ivy sat curled in the corner on a thin blanket, a stuffed bear clutched tight to her chest. Her face was pale cheeks, sunken eyes wide and hollow. A plate with a few broken crackers sat beside her. Her lips trembled as she looked up at me, and then she was in my arms, fragile as a bird. "Uncle," she whispered, her voice breaking. I wrapped her in my raincoat, my own breath unsteady as I snapped photos of the room, the latch, the crumbs, anything that might prove what I was seeing. Then I carried her out into the storm. As I drove back toward Salem's Ivy, dozing weakly against me, my mind wouldn't stop replaying the sight of that room. Why would my parents lock her in there? Why had they left her alone? The questions ripped at me as hard as the rain on my windshield. On the passenger seat, her stuffed bear lay limp damp from her tears. I noticed a small plastic bowl abandoned by the door of the storage room, streaked with what looked like dried seasoning instant noodles maybe. And on the desk in the hallway, a calendar with evening dates crossed out in red ink. Patterns, signs of absence. My blood ran cold. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. The ER lights felt too bright, too sterile against the storm I'd just pulled Ivy out of. Nurses rushed forward as soon as they saw me carrying her, their expressions hardening at the sight of her thin frame. Dr. Nora Patel, a pediatrician on call, guided me into an exam room. I laid Ivy down my hands, reluctant to let go. Blood pressure, temperature, blood work. Everything was logged with brisk precision. Dr. Patel's face tightened as the numbers came in. Malnutrition, severe vitamin deficiencies, chronic neglect. She explained in calm, steady words that Ivy would need to be admitted for monitoring and long-term care. My chest ached with every phrase. I signed the forms agreeing to temporary guardianship, while trying not to let Ivy see the guilt tearing me apart. When Dr. Patel asked about her guardians, I told her the truth. I couldn't reach them. My parents hadn't answered a single call. She frowned, noting it in the file, and said a mandatory report would be filed with Child Protective Services. For the first time, it felt real. This wasn't just my private horror, it was now a case. Evidence, paperwork, investigations. I handed over the photos I'd taken at the house, every detail I could recall. The scratched latch on the storage door. The bowl with its salt-stained residue. The crossed-out evenings on the calendar. Dr. Patel nodded grimly, telling me these details would matter. Later, when Ivy stirred, I held her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she clung to me. In a whisper barely audible, she said, "I didn't know how to call you. I don't know your number." "A lady." She gave me the phone. My head snapped toward her. "What lady?" Ivy's eyes flickered uncertain. She had a dark raincoat. She pushed the phone through the door with a note. It said, "Call Uncle Silas." My breath caught. Someone else had been there. Someone who knew what was happening inside that house and decided to intervene. A stranger in the storm, watching from the shadows, slipping Ivy the lifeline that saved her. Who was she? Why did she know to call me? As Ivy drifted back to sleep, my mind raced. I scribbled a to-do list in the small notebook I carried. Check neighborhood cameras, ask Esther across the street. Pull cell tower data from the call dig into my parents' whereabouts that night. Where had they gone while Ivy sat locked away in the dark? Who was the woman in the rain? Guilt pressed heavy on me, but so did resolve. I couldn't undo the years I'd been too distracted to notice what was happening. But now, I could fight. Ivy deserved more than survival. She deserved truth and safety and a future not defined by neglect. As the storm continued to rage outside the hospital windows, I realized this night was only the beginning. The house in Salem had given me more questions than answers, and the woman in the dark raincoat had opened a door I couldn't ignore. Tomorrow I would return. I had to. I went back to Salem the next morning with the kind of focus that comes after a sleepless night. The storm had wrung the neighborhood dry. Leaves clung to the white fence like bruises. I unlocked the back door I'd forced open and stepped into the same stale quiet, my phone ready to document everything I should have seen sooner. In the study, my father's desk sat like a stage-set blotter, square pens aligned a framed family photo aimed straight at the door, as if to greet any visitor with a smile that no longer meant anything. Inside the top drawer, I found envelopes from the bank with monthly memos labeled Ivy's allowance in my mother's tidy cursive. The deposits matched the amount I'd heard them mention, a stipend meant for Ivy's care. Yet the receipts paper-clipped behind each envelope told a different story. A new set of audiophile speakers, a tasting menu at a downtown restaurant, 2 orchestra tickets for a weekend I remembered Ivy missing school. I photographed every page, date, and total. A leather-bound planner sat in the lower drawer. Pages were filled with dinner parties, gallery nights, and social commitments, many in the evenings. The same evenings crossed off on the hallway calendar. Next to a Saturday entry was a small star and the word late. I pressed my palm onto the paper to steady my breath and kept going. Esther opened her door on the second knock. She wore a faded sweater and the kind of gaze that has kept a quiet count of wrongs over the years. We spoke in her living room while the heater ticked. She said she often heard crying late at night, thin and muffled, and saw my parents leaving dressed up the porch lights set on a timer that clicked on at the same minute every evening. Once she woke to the sound of rain and saw a woman in a dark raincoat standing beneath the eaves across my parents' back steps, motionless, looking toward the kitchen door. I thought she might be waiting for someone, Esther said, but the house stayed dark. She wrote down what she remembered. I snapped a photo of her note along with the time-stamped snapshot she'd taken months ago of my parents heading out in formal wear. From there I drove to Ivy's elementary school. The secretary led me to a small conference room where Clara Reed, a young teacher with calm eyes, had a folder ready. Attendance log showed a pattern of starts and abrupt stops, Ivy present for a day or two, then absent for a week. Behavioral notes described lethargy and hunger. Staff had tried calling the listed guardians again and again with no reply. Clara told me she'd sent emails that bounced back or went unanswered. I asked if the school could prepare a formal letter about educational neglect and the attempts to contact my parents. She nodded and promised to send one by day's end. When she said Ivy often arrived clutching her worn stuffed bear and asking for just a snack, please, I had to look away to keep my voice from breaking. I returned to the house with a list of places I hadn't checked. The hallway closet held little besides a vacuum and neatly folded linens. In the study again, I crouched to check the file cabinet. An almost invisible keyhole winked from the back panel of the lowest drawer. I found the key taped under the desk drawer runner, the kind of trick you learn from watching a man who hides whiskey in the garage rafters and insists he doesn't drink. The lock gave with a soft click. Inside lay a thin folder labeled IVK in my father's handwriting. My mouth went dry. The folder held a photocopy of a trust document titled IVV Kane, with Freya's name in the grantor line dated years back, and a stapled packet behind it, a draft petition to assume management of a minor's trust by a legal guardian. The draft was partially filled in my mother's name, typed neatly beside proposed guardian. My father's contact information clipped to the front, but the signature lines were blank, flagged with yellow sticky notes that read, "Sign and notarize and submit with letters." Tucked behind those forms were printouts of bank balances and quarterly statements that didn't belong to any account I knew. I photographed each page, every reference number, every address line, and kept digging until I was sure I had everything. I called the HOA office on the drive back to the hospital. The manager said the neighborhood didn't maintain shared security cameras. Only individual homes had doorbells with recording, and my parents had never opted in. He was willing to confirm in writing the neighborhood's general policies and the dates of community events that matched the planner entries. Another thread for the file. Back at the ER, I showed Dr. Battelle the documents and told her what Esther and Clara had said. She reminded me to keep my focus feed. Ivy, keep her warm. Let the professionals record the rest. I stood at the foot of Ivy's bed and watched the slow rise and fall of her chest, the cuff on her arm printing out proof that she was still here. When she woke, she asked for water and a cracker, then told me she didn't like the house when it got quiet at night, because quiet means I'm not allowed to come out. I wrote it down word for word. Every sentence felt like a stone in my pocket, heavy, undeniable, something I would carry into whatever came next. That night, at the kitchen table in my apartment with papers spread out under the lamplight, I built a timeline. Allowance deposits, luxury purchases, party dates, school absences, medical findings, the locked room, the woman in the rain, and now this, a dormant trust with my niece's name on it, and a ready-made path for my parents to seize control. The pattern stopped being a suspicion and became a map. I texted a single line to a number a friend had given me earlier that day, a family attorney in Portland named Harper Quinn. "I need help," I wrote. "It's about my niece." I didn't sleep, but the night changed. It shifted from helplessness to intent. The next morning I would put these pages on a lawyer's desk and say the words out loud. It wasn't just neglect. It was a plan. Harper's office sat above a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and burnt sugar. She had a court-calm voice and an efficient way of arranging paper that made chaos look solvable. I laid out everything: the photos of the storage room, the bowl with its salted crust, the calendar, the receipts tied to Ivy's allowance, Esther's written account, Clara's attendance logs, the preliminary medical report. At the end, I slid across the trust file and waited. "This isn't only a child welfare issue," Harper said after a long silence. "This is financial misconduct woven through a pattern of neglect." She asked for permission to contact the hospital social worker and the school to formalize statements. I agreed and signed what she put in front of me. When she examined the trust folder, she paused at the draft petition. She ran her finger along the footer where a template vendor's name sat in small type. "Look at the date in the metadata tag," she said, turning the sheet so I could see the microprint. This draft was generated recently, not years ago. My stomach flipped. She requested any documents I had with Orion's signature for comparison. I pulled up a scanned lease agreement and an old birthday card Orion had signed with a messy flourish back when we still believed life would be simple. Harper compared strokes and pressure on a sample signature that had been printed and traced on a photocopied page tucked in the folder. "This isn't your brother's hand," she said. "Someone tried to approximate it." By midday, Harper had coordinated with Dr. Patel, who agreed to provide a detailed medical statement outlining Ivy's malnutrition and the signs consistent with prolonged neglect. Esther would sign a sworn declaration about the late-night crying and the timed porch light. Clara planned to send a letter about school attendance, documented outreach attempts, and the times Ivy appeared hungry and exhausted. Harper said we would seek emergency temporary custody and that the trust materials would be secured under a preservation notice to prevent tampering. That afternoon, a lawyer representing my parents called Harper. He insisted I had broken into the house and stolen private records, that I was staging a campaign to smear respectable grandparents who had done their best. He hinted they would file a police report for trespass and demand the immediate return of all documents. Harper remained cool. She acknowledged the entry, explained the exigent circumstances and the medical emergency, and pointed out that the materials I possessed pertained directly to the welfare of a minor and potential exploitation. She asked the opposing counsel to preserve any and all communications referencing the trust, the allowance, and my brother, including emails sent from home IP addresses. The line went quiet for a beat. We sat with the door closed as Harper organized the motion packet. "They'll push back," she said, "and they'll present something that looks legitimate to confuse the court." Her prediction landed sooner than I expected. An hour later, an email arrived from opposing counsel attaching a typed letter ostensibly from Orion stating that he had asked his parents to look after Ivy and manage her property. The letter was undated, the salutation generic, the sign-off too neat for a man whose signatures had always carried a hurried slant. Harper printed it, then placed it beside the trust draft. "Same font," she said quietly. "Same spacing quirks. Whoever produced one likely produced the other." That evening at the hospital, I told Dr. Patel what was happening and asked Ivy how she was feeling. She said the Jell-O was her favorite because it was cold and not scary. When she finished a few bites, her eyelids grew heavy. Clara's letter arrived on my phone. The language was clinical and devastating. It spelled out months of absence, unreturned calls, and notes that Ivy asked for food at drop-off. I forwarded it to Harper and thanked Clara. A few minutes later, Esther texted to say she would stand in front of a judge if it came to that. Before I left, Ivy tugged my sleeve and whispered something I will hear for the rest of my life. If I tell on them, she said, eyes on the blanket, they locked the door again. I told her she wouldn't be locked in any more rooms. I told her we were going to make sure of it, not with promises, but with people and paper that had to be obeyed. On my way out of the hospital, rain started again, gentle this time, like a reminder. Harper called as I reached the truck. She had filed for emergency custody and a temporary restraining order preventing my parents from contacting Ivy or accessing any of her accounts. A hearing was set on short notice. "Bring everything tomorrow," she said. "We'll put it in front of a judge and let the facts do what facts do." I parked outside my parents' house one last time that night, not to go in, but to see it for what it was. The porch light blinked on at the exact minute Esther had described, the timing precise and unnerving. No movement inside. I thought of the woman in the raincoat, the hand sliding a phone and a note under a door to reach a child no one else was seeing. Somewhere someone had decided that staying silent was worse than getting involved. That choice had started everything. Back in Portland, I spread the documents on my kitchen table again, the lamplight turning the paper cream and the ink nearly blue. I placed the forged letter in the center, flanked by the school's letter, the medical report, the allowance receipts, the trust draft with its sticky notes, and my photos from the locked room. The pattern wasn't just a map anymore. It was a case. Tomorrow I would walk into court and name what my parents had done. I would call it by its real name and ask the law to do what family had failed to do: protect a child. Esther called me 2 days later, her voice quick with urgency. She'd been cleaning out a drawer and found an old receipt where she had scribbled down a license plate number. It belonged to a car she remembered seeing outside my parents' house the night of the storm, parked half hidden under the dripping trees. She handed me the slip of paper when I stopped by. The numbers were smudged but legible. I drove straight to the DMV office, my hands tapping the counter as the clerk searched. The car was registered to Marjorie Collins, a retired nurse who once worked at Salem General. Her address wasn't far, a small house tucked behind a garden overgrown with lavender and weeds. When she opened the door, I saw a woman in her 60s with kind but guarded eyes. At first she denied knowing anything about that night, shaking her head saying she didn't want trouble. But when I mentioned Freya, my brother's late wife, her face softened. She stepped aside and let me in. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of chamomile tea steeping between us. She confessed she had been friends with Freya back when Ivy was a baby. Freya asked me once, Marjorie said quietly, that if something ever happened to her, would I keep an eye out for Ivy. I promised I would. After Freya's accident, she hadn't seen Ivy much, but on stormy nights, she sometimes walked past the house. That night, when she saw the place dark, she had a feeling something was wrong. She'd slipped an old phone through the door of the storage room with a note that said, "Call Uncle Silas." That simple act had saved Ivy. Then she reached into a folder and pulled out another document. "I never wanted to get in the middle of family matters," she said, "but Freya gave me this copy years ago, just in case." My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was Freya's personal will, witnessed and notarized, clearly stating that if Orion was unable to care for Ivy, guardianship was to pass to me. The words burned into me like fire. I had been meant to protect Ivy all along. I brought the document straight to Harper. She studied it line by line, confirmed the notarization was valid, and explained its weight in court. "This changes everything," she said. "Your parents were never the rightful choice." Relief mingled with anger inside me, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe, thinking perhaps we finally had something solid enough to end this nightmare. But Marjorie wasn't done. As I was leaving, she touched my sleeve and whispered, "I saw him." A few months back at a gas station off the highway. Orion. He looked thin, worn down, but alive. He seemed like he didn't want to be recognized. I didn't approach him. The words struck me harder than the storm that night. My brother was alive. He wasn't missing in some far-off abyss. He was out there running, hiding, maybe drowning in his own mistakes. My parents had sworn they hadn't heard from him. Had they lied to me? Had they hidden him away to keep Ivy close, to hold on to money and control? The thought sickened me. That evening, I sat in my truck outside the hospital, staring at the steering wheel. I had Freya's will in one hand, the ghost of Orion in the other. Ivy's fragile breaths echoed in my mind. For the first time, I felt the ground shifting beneath me in two directions at once: hope and dread, salvation and betrayal. I didn't know which would surface first. The courthouse smelled of varnish and old paper, its walls heavy with the weight of other families' broken stories. Ours was about to join them. When I stepped inside with Harper, I saw my parents seated at the far table, their lawyer whispering in their ears. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her lips trembling like she was the victim. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw locked, his posture rigid. The hearing began with their attorney painting me as a reckless bachelor trying to snatch a child for financial gain. He described me as unstable, impulsive, incapable of raising a girl alone. My parents nodded solemnly, their expressions rehearsed. I clenched my fists under the table. Harper rose, steady and sharp. She laid out Ivy's medical records first. Dr. Patel took the stand, her testimony cutting through the room with clinical precision. She spoke of malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, the evidence of prolonged neglect. Each word was a blade, and I saw my father flinch as if struck. Next came the financial trail. Harper presented the receipts, the bank envelopes, the luxury purchases tied to Ivy's allowance. I watched the judge's brow tighten as Harper stacked one contradiction after another. When she laid out the forged petition with Orion's signature, the courtroom murmured. Then came the surprise I hadn't fully anticipated. Harper called Marjorie Collins. My parents' faces shifted, confusion first, then alarm as she walked to the stand. She held Freya's will in her hands, and when she explained the promise she'd made when she said Freya had chosen me if Orion could not, my mother's face drained of color. My father shook his head, muttering lies, but Harper handed the judge the notarized document. It was validated on the spot. The weight of it was undeniable, but the other side wasn't finished. My parents' lawyer rose with smug certainty and produced a printed email. He claimed it was from Orion, sent years ago, granting them permission to care for Ivy and manage her affairs. The words were neat, formal, and cold. The judge studied it, but Harper leaned forward and requested a forensic review. She had already run the metadata. This was sent from an IP address belonging to the Kane's residence in Salem, not from Seattle, where Orion lived at the time. Gasps broke out in the gallery. My father's face hardened into stone. I thought it was over, that we had pulled away their last mask. But as the session drew to a close, the clerk rushed in with a fax still warm from the machine. It was from a law office in California. The words were blurred, but the meaning was clear. Orion was alive, and he was petitioning to restore his parental rights. He promised to appear. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. My heart lurched. The brother I'd mourned, the man I'd thought lost, was not only alive but about to walk back into the story at the very moment Ivy's future hung in the balance. Relief, dread, anger, and hope collided inside me in a single violent rush. If he truly came back, everything we'd fought for could collapse, or it could finally set Ivy free. As the gavel struck to adjourn, I realized nothing was settled. My parents' lies were cracked wide open, but Orion's shadow now loomed over all of us. The truth was coming, and it would not wait. The courtroom buzzed with a restless silence, everyone sensing something was about to break. I sat at the petitioner's table, my palms damp against the wood, Harper steady beside me. The bailiff opened the side door, and in walked Orion. My breath caught. He was thinner than I remembered, his hair streaked with gray, though he was only a year younger than me. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of years pressed them down, but his eyes, those familiar eyes, still carried the sharpness of the boy I'd once protected. The room fell quiet enough to hear the shuffle of his shoes on the floor. Ivy froze where she sat with the guardian ad litem, her little hand gripping the stuffed bear until its seams strained. When she recognized him, her eyes went wide. She didn't run to him. She didn't look away either. She simply clung tighter to that bear, caught between longing and fear. My heart tore open at the sight. Orion took the stand. His voice was hoarse, but his words came clear. He admitted to everything I already knew and the things I feared, the drinking, the pills, the years when grief had left him incapable of being a father. He confessed to leaving Ivy with our parents because he thought they would do better than he could. Then he lifted his chin, forcing himself to look at the judge. He said he had been sober for over a year, that he was running a small software company in California, that he was ready to reclaim his role as Ivy's father. He wanted custody back. The judge asked if I had questions. I stood slowly, every eye in the room on me. "Do you know," I asked, my voice breaking, "what our parents have done to your daughter? Do you know she was locked in a storage room, starving, while they spent her allowance on concerts and restaurants?" Orion's eyes filled, his jaw trembling. He shook his head. "They told me she was fine," he whispered. "They said she was thriving. They said you were too busy to care, that you wanted her trust fund. They told me not to talk to you." I felt the ground tilt. He had believed them. And then in front of everyone, he said the words that cut me to the core. My father sent me an email warning me not to trust you. He said you wanted Ivy's money, not Ivy. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My father stiffened his face, a mask of denial. Harper leaned forward, her voice precise as a scalpel. She produced the metadata report showing the email had been sent from my parents' home IP address, not from Seattle, where Orion had been at the time. The judge's eyes darkened. My mother began to sob, her tissue trembling in her hand. The thrum of justice was finally audible, like a drumbeat building in the room. But the true climax came when Ivy stood. Her knees shook, her voice so soft the bailiff had to ask her to repeat it. "I don't want to live with Grandma and Grandpa," she said. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch forever, she turned toward Orion. "I don't want you to go away again. I just want to be safe." Every voice in the courtroom fell silent. My brother's face crumpled. He covered his eyes with his hand, tears slipping through his fingers. I wrapped my arm around Ivy, steadying her trembling body as she buried her face into my shirt. I realized then that no matter what the law decided, her words had already drawn the line. She had spoken the truth none of us could ignore. I looked across at Orion, at the brother I had once carried on my back through wheat fields, the man who had disappeared into addiction and left me to pick up his broken pieces. For the first time in years, his eyes met mine, not with defiance, but with something closer to surrender. The gavel struck, adjourning until the following morning for the judge's ruling. I left the courthouse with Ivy's small hand in mine, the storm of the past crashing against the fragile hope of what lay ahead. The next morning, the courthouse air felt heavier, as though everyone knew the verdict would redraw our family forever. I sat straight-backed, Ivy nestled beside me with her guardian Harper poised with her notes. Across the aisle, my parents looked brittle, their lawyer whispering with increasing agitation. Orion sat alone, his head bowed, hands clasped tightly. Judge Holt entered, his expression grave. When he spoke, every syllable carried the weight of finality. After careful review of testimony, medical reports, financial evidence, and legal documents, this court finds Harlan and Lila Kane unfit for guardianship. Their rights are hereby terminated, and the matter will be referred to Child Protective Services for further oversight. My mother let out a sob muffled into her hands. My father's face froze as if stone had taken the place of flesh. The gallery murmured, some with pity, most with disapproval. Their fall from grace was complete. Then the judge turned to me. He held up Freya's notarized will. This document names Silas Kane as the secondary guardian in the event Orion Kane is unable to serve. Based on the evidence presented, the court awards full custody of Ivy to Silas Kane. He has demonstrated the capacity, stability, and commitment necessary to protect and nurture this child. My chest filled with a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I turned to Ivy, who looked up at me with wide eyes. For the first time, I allowed myself to smile. The judge wasn't finished. He turned to Orion. "You remain Ivy's biological father. The court recognizes your efforts toward sobriety and rehabilitation. You will be granted supervised visitation with the possibility of expanding those rights if you can demonstrate consistent stability and continued sobriety." Orion nodded, tears streaming unchecked down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered, though I knew those words weren't for the judge alone. My parents tried one last time. Lila reached her hand toward Ivy, crying out, "Please forgive us, darling." But Ivy pulled closer to me, her little frame trembling, her silence a final verdict all her own. The bailiff guided my parents out, their heads low, their reputations in shreds. Salem would not forget. When the courtroom emptied, Orion approached me. He stood there shaking and finally said, "I failed her. I failed you. But you carried her when I couldn't. You were the father she needed." I swallowed hard. "You still have a chance," I said quietly, "but don't ever vanish again." Ivy hesitated, then gave him a small hug, tentative but real. Orion broke down, clutching her gently, promising he would fight to stay present. Back in Portland, weeks later, life began to take shape again. Ivy shared a room with Milo, who taught her to shoot hoops in the backyard. Sienna baked her cookies shaped like stars. The color returned to her cheeks, the shadows beneath her eyes softened. One morning as we sat under the apple tree Sienna had planted years ago, I watched Ivy laugh as blossoms fell in her hair. The tree was blooming for the first time, and it felt like a sign that something broken had begun to mend. A letter arrived not long after. Inside was a check from Orion made out for a staggering amount. The note with it read, "This isn't repayment. It's gratitude. You saved her life." I folded it carefully and put it aside, vowing it would serve Ivy's future, not my own. Now, when I look back, I know this story was never just about custody battles or trust funds. It was about the meaning of family, what it asks of you, what it takes to fight for it, and how love sometimes demands you stand against your own blood. Responsibility, not DNA, makes someone a parent, and when the time came to choose, I chose Ivy. So here's what I tell anyone willing to listen. Trust your instincts, act when something feels wrong, and never underestimate the cost of silence. A child's safety outweighs pride, reputation, or money. That stormy night taught me one truth I'll never forget. Family is not who claims you. It's who shows up when you're locked away in the dark, waiting for someone to turn the key.